We're going to talk today primarily about financial implications for the church and for thinking about affordable housing development. So Emma is currently handing out pieces of paper for us to read. I'm wearing my glasses, trying to look smarter. I have one in my pocket, but Emma's going to be the reader, I think. I'm going to come down here too. You ready? Yeah. Go for it.
All right, so, whoa, sorry. Wake up! So we're going to read this, our church covenant together. Going to kind of go slow. It's not our church covenant. We're going to read this church covenant that is not our church covenant together. So we're going to go kind of slow. We will approach all things in prayer. We will speak from our own personal experience, from I, not we or they. We accept disagreement as normal and natural to community processes. We will speak face to face, honestly, and without rancor, avoiding triangulation and hearsay. We will listen with an open and non-judgmental mind and try as hard to understand as to be understood. We seek to discover what is best for our church as a whole, not what may be best for ourselves or for some small group in the church. We are committed to being inconvenienced for the gospel. We will support the final outcome of the decision-making process. As forgiven people, we will choose to forgive one another. Thank you. Amen.
All right. Thanks, Emma. So we'll just start kind of recapping where we've been before. And again, a reminder that back in June, we actually, through the first half of the year, we had a number of listening sessions to hear thoughts and comments about what the future of the church could be, focused mostly on the redevelopment of Pilgrim Hall. But after the kind of day-long meeting on June 10th, quite a few members of the congregation thought that it would be worthwhile to explore the potential for developing affordable housing on our campus. So what we've done since this gives you the results of those series of conversations and that vote, showing that there was strong support for exploring this and learning more about it over time. So where we have been up to this point, I think we can go there now. We can skip this one too. So the process we have been through, just to recap where we've been, in October, Saha, an affordable housing developer, did a presentation on one of the ways they could imagine affordable housing development on our campus. And then we had a series of 3 informational sessions in November, talked about parking. In December, talked about open space. Just about 3 weeks ago, East Bay housing organizations came in and talked about the need for affordable housing in the East Bay and the Bay Area. And then today we're going to talk a little bit about financing. What follows after this will be a poll that will be circulated. Actually, 2 things will happen. The first thing will be we'll provide some summary information that encapsulates all the things and the questions and information that's been presented over the last few sessions since October. And then with that information, which will be available via the website, We'll be doing a poll of the congregation to get a sense, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But really what we're looking for is whether this has been sufficient information, whether people feel like this is something we'd like to explore further with more seriousness, or if we've heard enough and it's just not something that we want to do. So that will come, and we'll talk a little bit about that when the presentation's done. So I imagine we were going to be using the screen right here instead of the ones up there. So it's a little harder to see, but again, just to center ourselves in where we are right now. This is all of the land that FCCB owns here in this area. This is old, and so it still had an actual Pilgrim Hall down on the lower right-hand corner of the photograph there, the sanctuary building running parallel to it with Plymouth House up at the north end of the campus. And then over on the west side of campus over here, there's our parking lot running along the side of the sanctuary and then making the dogleg turn and Durant House up there. So, and we can move to the next one now. The space that we're talking about, and again, this, thank you, Mo, for your hand-scratched parking lot diagram. The space we were talking about for potential affordable housing development essentially is Durant House and the lot to the immediate west of it. So retaining the playground area, it would reduce the parking lot that we currently have, cutting it roughly in to about a half or 60%, and thinking about talking with an affordable housing developer about a development up on the northwest corner of campus along Durant. So far, so good. Okay, so we're going to do this in a little Q&A format. Really simple questions and answers. So if we were to do affordable housing development, what would this cost FCCB? And the answer really is nothing in particular, because it's not our responsibility to develop the housing if we develop it. The actual direct cost, there isn't one. There's the indirect cost of the loss of parking space, the revenue that comes from the parking lot during the week and for special events. But for anything else, we do not have a financial stake in actually developing the housing itself. Okay, we jumped to the answer fast, but what might a nonprofit developer pay for the use of this property? There's a general rule of thumb that varies a little bit, but for the most part, talking with actually 3 different affordable housing developers, the number is roughly $50,000 per unit developed. And we've been thinking generally about, given the footprint and available space and how high the building can go, that this would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 units of housing, which results in a payment of about $2.5 million to us, which would be essentially a payment on a long-term ground lease that a developer would use the parcel to develop housing on. The payment is likely to come in some chunks over some relatively short period of time, and would depend a bit on whether they're actually able to get through the financing and permitting process to actually develop the housing. Next question, what might a for-profit developer pay for the similar parcel? This also is a little trickier to answer just because nobody has actually done a particular feasibility study, but generally a for-profit developer will pay more per unit than a nonprofit developer, somewhere around twice as much. The issue here is that for a for-profit market rate property, the units will need to be a little bit larger. They'll need to have more amenities, and so they'll be able to fit fewer units into the same size development as an affordable housing development, which would be smaller units and primarily focused on housing, and they wouldn't necessarily need things like a gym, a lot of parking spaces. There's a distinction between the way the project is developed. So payment from a for-profit developer ends up somewhere pretty close to what the affordable housing development would cost. The question we would have is that there's currently a fair amount of saturation of market rate units right here, and whether there's a real strong interest in developing market rate units here when we know that the Methodist Church is going all market rate, and that there's a market rate project right there. It's questionable whether a for-profit developer would be as interested in paying a high top dollar to be able to develop this site. And then how does this all happen? That's sort of a big question. If we were to move ahead with something like this, our responsibility would be to connect with developers through a request for proposal process. That developer will come back with all the economics to us, what they imagine is the timeline, how the project would look, some preliminary drawings, and some estimates of how they're going to be able to move through the timeline. Essentially, this is a 2 to 3 year development process. One of the things that they will need to do is apply for low-income housing tax credits, which are only awarded on a competitive basis twice a year. So there's no certainty that they'll be able to walk up and get those credits. They'll have to make sure they have a project that meets a lot of the expectations for the program, and that can take some time and add some complexity. There's also likely that a developer will need to have 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different sources of financing to be able to complete the project. The developers where you would likely to work with would be people who have a lot of experience in this, but there's just no way to speed it up. It just takes time to pull all those pieces together. Oh, and one more thing to say is that through all this, it is the developer's responsibility to pursue the permits, to make sure that they're doing everything that they're supposed to do. At this point, we have entered into an agreement with them to develop the property, and it's largely not our responsibility other than to make sure that they're not doing anything they're not supposed to do using our parking lot, whatever that agreement is. So then what's next in this process? So the summary presentation that combines information from all the presentations we've done over the past few months will be available in early February. We'll be deciding exactly what that format will be. We're thinking there might be some video that might make it a little more interesting, but we'll bring all that stuff together so that everyone can be reminded of what we've talked about over the past few months. And then there's another one. In early to mid-February, the survey poll will be sent to the membership to be able to collect information. There will be, I think this is on this slide now, let's see. Yep, really 3 options in this poll. One is stop. We've heard enough about this, feel like this is not something that we're able to do at this time. Too hard, too much change, just too much for us to think about. Another option is to put it on pause. This is a lot for us to think about. We have other projects going on. We want to focus on Pilgrim Hall. Let's wait a year or 2 and bring this back as something we really want to pursue. Or say, let's just go for it. And let's start now. We know it's going to take some time, but we feel like this is an important thing for us to do. And this is another step in exploration. So a yes or a no doesn't mean that we're actually signing a contract with anybody. It actually begins a process for us to get specific about working with someone to do this, bringing committees together to think about the use of the land and the other implications. So it would be another multi-month process, but one that has a desired outcome of ending with an agreement with the developer over time. That's it. So now it's time for questions. Why don't we start with Nick?
Thanks, Scott. That was very clear. Just a question, when you spoke about engaging with the developer as being a 2 to 3 year process, that's just the process of getting to a point where they're permitted and ready to construct. So construction would be another year or so.
Yes, so it will take that long. It will take that 2 or 3 years for them to go through the housing tax credit application and receipt process, putting the financing together, doing all the plans and specs that they have to do and all that work. So it would be about that long.
Thank you for the presentation and the comprehensive review. Should we decide to move forward, at what point do funds start coming to us? Do we have to wait 2 or 3 years until they get their permitting and things before we get paid anything?
Yes, it will be until they're able to close their financing. which would be in 2 or 3 years. What can happen in the interim period is for them to make small payments, essentially earnest money payments for our agreement to hold the land for their use in the future. Typically, a portion of it would be refundable and a portion of it would be not. It's sort of a time determined in where it's considered where the money would go hard, and at that point, we'd be able to collect it if they haven't executed yet. Where's the microphone? Charles.
Thank you for this overview. I have several questions. One has to do with the scope of what the Blue Sky Committee did in the form of looking at other options besides our parking lot space for viable alternatives to building with or without any obstruction of the parking lot, as far as where else we might devote our energies in this affordable housing direction that would not necessarily involve using our, what are the alternatives and what do those mean? I have not heard anything about exploring those options as opposed to everything seems to have been focused on our property. And I think to make an informed decision, it should be looked at. So I'd like to understand that. That's the first question. Second question has to do...
Want him to answer it first? Should we answer it first? You can. Do you want to pass on?
Well, it depends on, I'll just wait and answer if you want.
Sure. No, we were focused really on the scope of what we were doing was focused on particular on Pilgrim Hall and then on our campus in particular. So what we've been doing and what the education's been focused on has been entirely on the campus. And if we decide that we don't want to do something on the campus, there's no reason why we can't explore something somewhere else. But we did this as a deliberate choice so that it didn't become too many choices and too many options. What we want to do is ask the question, is this something we want to do soon here? And limit it to that.
Well, I'll just make a comment that I wouldn't want to vote for something if I hadn't considered what the other options were. So I would vote no just on the basis that I didn't know whether there was a better option that we could employ.
Okay.
And I'm disappointed that we haven't looked further in some structured way. In relation to the options that you just laid out about continuing, pausing, and so on, it seems to me that we do not know yet what we're going to get from the insurance. I've heard several different things. I've heard the low 8 figures. I've heard somewhere close to 20 million, which I don't know. To me, that's not a low 8 figure, but certainly it's not a high 100 million. But we also, so we don't know what that is. Secondly, we don't have a clear sense of what we want to do with that Pilgrim Hall rebuild or what the costs would be. So we're looking at a potential gap, but we don't know if there will be a gap. Thirdly, in relation to that, we are looking out several years, 5 to 7 years, before we have finished paying back the loan that we took out to do the school, and after which I've heard that we would be getting somewhere in the order of magnitude of $20,000 a month. That we're not paying back to the Berkeley Pilgrimage Foundation. So I haven't seen anything that lets me understand how the church's finances can be structured and what gap there would be between the time we would have to put down money to build the redo of Pilgrim Hall. There's some kind of gap. I think it's reasonable to assume, but we don't know what that is. And we don't know how long we would have to cover it before the additional money from having repaid the loan to the Berkeley Pilgrimage Foundation. I mean, there's a lot of different pieces there that, to me, argue against making any kind of decision about needing to have money from doing anything on this parking lot. And I also know that given the political climate that we're in, any number of things could change that could change the desirability of doing anything. But I don't think it's in doubt that there is an issue around affordable housing. I think almost everybody would say, I actually either am in that situation or I know plenty of people who are. The question is, what is the best way to deal with it? Does it involve our property? And how does it dovetail with all the things that go on with the redo of Pilgrim Hall? And we are not getting any information. You do not have that information. You cannot share that information because you don't have it.
Can you wrap it up just?
So I think that until those kinds of questions can be presented to the congregation, pushing for any kind of a vote on it now is premature.
Okay. Thanks, Charles.
So back to the first of several questions and comments you've offered, Charles, which are helpful. This is part of a very important discussion. When we first spoke of and researched the idea as part of the Blue Sky, what do we want to do with Pilgrim Hall? There was a strong desire of staff to include some amount of housing in that building. So the first item of affordable housing, what do we consider, was can we add units on the top of Pilgrim Hall? Through some research and diligence on that issue, we deemed it unfeasible. We could not get a developer to consider it as an attractive project. It was too small. It would be too complicated with separate entrances and multiple elevators, be very inefficient. It would not work out. So we've refocused our efforts here. We have an asset, we have land. If we don't want to use the asset, maybe we'll come up with money and carry our commitment to affordable housing to a different location. But we had a great speaker on that last conversation. I won't repeat that, but I just wanted to step back and remind you that it started above Pilgrim Hall and it moved to the parking lot for a number of very sound reasons. There's more questions to be answered.
One way of thinking about why are we talking about our land is that of the assets this church has, the biggest in terms of dollars is the land, and it is not the one that we can rent or derive income from. So affordable housing was one possibility for deriving income from our largest asset. That was one reason for looking at it. Thank you.
Sure. And so back to Charles. So I'm hearing in the question you're asking, you are tying the up to $2.5 million that can come from a developer to a benefit for Pilgrim Hall. And I separate them a little bit in my mind, that it would be really nice to have additional money that could be one potential use. But I'm really thinking about this as putting all this behind us and not thinking about this for a minute. Do we want to do this project right here as a whole separate thing? And while it can be beneficial over time to the rebuild of Pilgrim Hall, I'm thinking about it as a separate effort. And you're welcome to do it that way, and you're welcome not to, but it is a little strange, I suppose, to some to have this conversation in the midst of the Pilgrim Hall redevelopment question, and that could be one of the reasons why I want to pause this.
I might speak to Charles's
Well,
question
am I
about
speaking now?
financing
Yeah.
terms.
Did I get recognized?
I was going to try to answer.
Because I got the mic, I recognized.
Yeah.
So I wanted to thank Charles for raising this possibility of looking at other ways that we can help with the problem of affordable housing. And I think we absolutely should do that. I think we absolutely should do exploration of our own site as well. There's no reason why it has to be an either or kind of choice. You know, it may not be possible or feasible to do it on our campus, but I'd like to at least explore it to see if it is. The decision we're being asked to make is not a committal to absolutely doing development on our site. We're simply trying to gather the information to decide, can it be done? Can it be done without too much of a burden to the church, either monetarily or in terms of loss of parking? I mean, I think there are ways that Scott raised. I think you mentioned at the last session, possibly a developer might propose building on a platform. That would be a way to save essentially all of our parking. I would totally support that, even if it meant that we wouldn't get the full 2 million, 2.5 million. Even if it meant we had to sacrifice our, quote, profit to do that. Why? Because it's such a need to provide for the folks who are literally in the streets and who soon will be in the streets, who are in homes now but can't afford them. So if we can help those 40 or 50 people with no skin off our nose, preserve most or all of our parking, why not? Let's at least find out if it can be done.
Hi, Roger Bash. I just want to take this opportunity. My understanding is we're not going to have a congregational meeting about this before we're asked to vote. There'll be a report coming out from the committee, and I understand that Mo Wright is going to perhaps do another report to accompany that. But I would just like to state publicly and clearly that I think it's time to stop this process. I think we're doing damage to the church. I think there are significant problems with the design, the ideas that have come up so far that are going to be, some are going to be insurmountable, and in the end, this is not going to happen. But the longer we continue this, the more problems we have for the congregation itself. I think that, some of the obvious ones are that, the destruction of giving up of our parking lot to create this is going to be problematic for us, for older people, for younger people, young families. That's not going to work well for them. It's going to lower the value of this whole property as a venue for musicians to come in if they can't really use the parking lot for dropping off their equipment and their instruments. I think generally it's just going to lower the economic vitality of the church to do this. I think also that it would eliminate the drop-off for the school. And part of our use permit for getting the school in there in the first place was that we would have a drop-off in the parking lot so that the kids can be safely dropped off there. And that would eliminate that because you'd have to back out of this parking lot. And that's not going to be a safe environment. It's not going to be good for the school. And so it lowers, and I assume this is part of our lease agreement with them, that we provide that as well as the playground. And so there's a negative consequence there. It makes that whole property less valuable if we can't do drop off. And frankly, the city may just say, no, you can't do that. I mean, as much as we say that they're in support of low-income housing, they may just say, no, you can't do that. That is unsafe. The economics also of this project, when Saha came in, they said the bare minimum for them is 40 units to make this work. They're saying 50. It's somewhere in there. They were counting on building all the way across that property, right from basically 10 feet from the sanctuary all the way to Baja. And now we're saying you're going to be having to do this on about 50% of that. So how do you do that and still maintain those 40 units? You do it by going up. And the only way they're going to do that is going up to 75 feet. That requires a variance. There's a reason why we have zoning laws here. Everything on the other side of the street is taller. On our block, there are no buildings higher than 45 feet. And so the developer is going to be asking for 75 feet. And so we're going to have a battle with Baja on that alone is going to be ugly. On the other is that it would require taking down Durant House. Again, not a great building, but one that we're going to have a fight on. So I think we're in for a lot of trouble on that. The economics also are that it would be a tall building that is not very well built, that will look poor once it's built, and it will not age gracefully. And so that would be our legacy of something that we've built. But the other thing, and it's sort of the elephant in the room for me, is that What has just happened in the budget here is a vote of no confidence. The fact that the people didn't complete their pledges, we're $200,000 shy on this coming year. And yes, it's great that the budget committee has been able to do this, but basically, you know, and I don't know the reason for it, but I gotta believe that part of it lays at the feet of how this has been presented, how it has been aggressively promoted, even to the point of saying this is what Jesus wants us to do. I just don't think that this is going to be healthy for the church to continue on, and I'd like to see it stopped at this straw vote, because I think in the end it'll be stopped in some way, and to continue it on is just going to cause greater conflict within the congregation, when what we really need to be doing is coming together as a congregation to concentrate on the rebuilding of Pilgrim Hall. That's going to be hard enough. Thank you.
So just a couple of things. So again, it seems like in one of these meetings, we're drawing a conclusion about the aesthetics of the project that we don't even know. So I would like to leave that out and kind of off our mental record. That area will let a developer go to 60 feet with density bonus for affordable housing, and right across the street they're going to be able to go up to 75 because it happens to be zoned that way all the way along that side of the street. So it's going to start to become a dark canyon, whether we have it or not. I had one other thing that I was going to say that I seem to have forgotten, but thanks for your comments, Roger.
I have a comment that it seemed there was an alternative of low-income housing or market rate housing, and I would strongly suggest we go for diversity, that it be 10 units at market rate and 35 units of low-income housing, so that the rich people get to know some poorer people, and the poorer people get to meet some rich people right next door, as opposed to a couple blocks down where they don't communicate.
Thanks. There's some questions up this way, Nate.
That's a clarifying response. Just back to one of Roger's points. Dana Street over here is going to be changing. There's going to be a bike lane added. And we are, not me, but the church is in current discussions with our council member and the school to develop a drop-off lane here that can be used on specific days and times. So I don't think that losing the opportunity to drop off in the parking lot when we may have one that's right here is really, you know, the end of the world.
I just want to correct a misconception. I went over everybody's giving record, and I can tell you that the drop-off was an entire surprise to me, and I've been doing this for 21 years. And the main reason it was a surprise was because people did not finish their pledges and did not tell me. We weren't able to make an adjustment during the middle of the year. We also had 75% made their pledges and completed them just fine. There were 25%. There was about 7% who moved away. There was about 3% that died. There was several percent of people who missed only one payment. So it was a variety of reasons. There were 2 people who let me know that they would not be completing their pledge because they were unhappy. 2. So don't say, and in previous years, we have never been up against it like this. We have always had extra money left over at the end of the year. That's why our contingency budget had $70,000+ in it. Because over the especially the last 10 years, we have never not made our budget. So this is an extraordinary moment. It doesn't have any rhyme or reason. It just happened. And we knew that at some point, you know, growing a church, etc., was going to take a while. And now we have a full staff to implement growing the church. And let's go for it.
My name is Tim Sweetser. I'm a member of the congregation. And I'm trying to think about the timeline here. So we started doing this, we started our own process more than 6 months ago. And it will take 2 to 3 years to develop this, and an additional year to build. So we're talking about like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years or something from the start of it to when like people might actually be able to move in. And so for that reason, I would like us to get this moving more quickly. I don't think we can, given the severity of the current affordable housing crisis, I don't think we can afford to take a wait-and-see attitude. The other thing that I would like to say is regarding the legacy of this project for FCCB. And the part of the legacy that I think is really important is that we will have sacrificed something of our own and given dozens of people, maybe hundreds of people over the years, like a safe place to live. And I think that's a wonderful legacy.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christina Hutchins, and I, unlike many people in this room, am a low-income person. I qualify for housing that is subsidized, and I'm not going to be able to support this project going forward at full tilt. And there's a few reasons for that. The first one, which was when I looked at the schematics of what can actually fit in that space of the parking lot, the separate units were as small as prison cells. And to expect someone to live that way just because they're of low income is really not fair. Another piece is I feel like we don't have full ownership of this project with our entire congregation, and we need that if we're going to do something like this. And there's a lot of ways we can support affordable housing. We could partner with the conference. We could partner with another congregation in the neighborhood. We could build something that's actually bigger and better and more aware of the needs of someone who is going to live there. And if we want to help in the immediate moment, one of the things that's needed is there is plenty of housing around here. It's very expensive. Albany and Berkeley do not have rent control, even though we think that it is rent control. It's a rent ceiling, which means that we get to, landlords can raise the rent up to a percentage of what rents are being raised all over the Bay Area. So as you know, rents all over the Bay Area are being raised rapidly. And so are they here. And I would love to see the church get involved in rent control. That would help so many people. Thank you.
Hi, Michelle. I'm struggling because I like the idea of providing affordable housing feels so right to me. And we're such a relatively affluent place in this community. And I have so much gratitude for this committee, for this incredible work that you've done. And I just, I have this fantasy that somehow we could take your amazing design and love of buildings, and how could we genuinely work together to create the economics of churches? Everything I read is most churches are struggling. And we have this massive campus, and it's an incredible asset, and God, I just wish that we could find a way that we could take all of this talent and pull together to make something happen. Like Christina, what you just said about your insights, like that's so important. And it just feels premature for us to be saying yes or no. It really does, Roger. And the question I have is, as we're moving forward in this process, can we put forth an RFP that is not binding in any way, so that as a community we can make a decision with more information? It feels like we're trying to say yes, no, and we're in this like, ugh. But if we actually had some real information, so that's the question, can we do an RFP that is non-binding? And can you guys sort of keep doing your work and have it not, find a way that's not tearing us apart in the way that it is?
So you're right that a big issue is that it's hard for us to get far down the road with information without being able to really talk seriously with somebody who could develop something. One of the things that anybody who's going to develop the property will want to know is that we're at least reasonably committed to moving ahead, that we're not going to pull the rug out from under them. So there's a little chicken and eggness going on. The hope would be that we'd be able to get something a little bit more with more detail without someone feeling, without an organization feeling like they needed to be fully committed to a project. But there's only so far either party is going to want to go. They're going to want to know that we're okay with it, and they're not going to want to share a lot of or spend a lot of time on something, first, if they're not going to get compensated for it, second, if it's not going to turn into a project. So that's the hard part, to be able to bridge that gap, and I think that's something we might be able to do. And kind of where we are right now is there have been a number of people feeling like they don't want to think about this anymore at all, and don't want to feel like we're going through a continued process that isn't going anyplace. So this is what we're just trying to get a sense for, whether we're still feeling like, or we are feeling like this is something we want to move ahead with, and then get more detail.
I wanted to back up Roger. I have most extreme respect for Roger and Mo. I've completely lost any regards at all to the committee. Our senior minister, I have no trust in at all. So how in my frustration, and I've tried to voice things, I've heard people after meeting voice their problems, been patronized, ignored. So what do? Well, there's an elephant in a room, and I mentioned this before. What I did was, when Molly asked for more money, I said, "To heck with you," and I gave maybe a quarter or a fifth of what it is. 5 years ago, I went through this fantastic divorce, and the lawyer told me I should make out a will. So that seemed kind of bizarre to me, but I guess I have an estate. I own a house. I've got all my savings. And I thought, well, I've got no family, no nothing. What do I do with this? Well, I made a will to FCCB. And that's when Pat was here. And I've been content with that until this came up. And there's no way I'm going to leave my money to this church, to the leadership of this church is really what I'm talking about. So I like Crowden School, so I'm going to give the money to them. But this is another thing I don't like. We got committee members who stand up there and look at their watches and say, "You've spoken enough." Sorry, Rachel. You I have respect for.
Sorry to jump in the queue. And I was a little bit late, so I'm not sure, did we read the covenant when we started? Okay. I want to say that I know you love this church, Jim, and I hear the pain in your voice about changes that you're not happy with, and I respect your right to share them. I want to just say, for me, when we call out individuals like Molly or the committee, that feels hard and painful and out of our covenant with each other. So I would ask us to be careful when we do that. And I just want to call us to that. And to say, that my voice is shaking, you know, this is a charged process, to state the obvious. And for some of us, that's okay. That helps us feel like we're engaged in something that we care about. For others, it feels really uncomfortable. And I just want to acknowledge that, take a deep breath, ask for God's Spirit to engage us. Be great thanks for all of the people in this room and continue this meeting. But I'm sorry that if you felt like I interrupted you, Jim, but I wanted to just remind us to call to the covenant, to keep this not being personally attached to any individual person. Thank you for allowing me to jump in the queue.
Yeah, just a question. You know, our second largest source of income is the rent that we get from tenants and so on. And did you look into whether it's really practical that during the day when 16 of our 20 spaces are taken up by the school to run a community center with no parking at all? I mean, would it have an effect on the second largest source of our income? Did you guys look into that?
We haven't finished the research, no. The question is still there. Thank you for...
Because I mean, that could be hundreds of thousands of dollars that could evaporate. So, and I guess the other thing is that I'm not sure we could get 50 units on that. I mean, I do a lot of affordable housing, did a thumbnail sketch, and I'm pretty sure that wouldn't happen. And also, with the preservation movement and so on, I think we might need to discount the lot for the house too. I mean, in all likelihood, we would have to move it someplace, on some lot or something. I mean, so that's a real issue too that needs to be looked into. But anyway, I don't feel like we've got a full airing of all the issues that are on the counter side of the affordable housing. I think I'm a strong proponent of affordable housing, but the costs I think haven't been fully explored.
Thank you, Mo. I agree.
To dovetail with Mo's comments, have you approached our major tenants like the Boys School and PBO and also the City of Berkeley? Would we be permitted to do this with our parking spots?
So, yes, we've spoken to the Boys School. He actually, the head of school is very supportive of the notion of affordable housing development, does say it's important to retain the parking lot or to retain the playground as an important part of their programming. And they have been involved in the conversation about the bike lane along Dana, so they can see that as a potential drop-off spot in lieu of any changes that might happen to the parking lot. One of the PBO question is one that is part of the tenant question about how important the appearance or having nearby parking is to them, and that's something that we're still working on.
And have you contacted the city to find out if we can be permitted to do this?
Which this?
Reducing the parking and turning it from a drive-through to an in and out.
We have not. We did talk with a zoning expert about what would happen with the number of spaces that would be available in the remaining lot configuration. It would reduce it. We would need to have a turnaround that will take away more spaces. We will have to include more accessible parking spaces, just part of the redevelopment that we're doing. So it will shrink the number of spaces we have, but it is still a permitted use based on our current use.
Okay.
I'd just like to point out that parking is not a luxury or a frivolous issue. Of course, we would all like to not be using cars, but many people in this congregation have to take a car to church, and that's why this issue is kind of fraught.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Back down. We're not voting on anything. That is, so we're doing that as an online thing in a couple of weeks. Right. So we're going to do 3 more questions, and then we'll wrap up.
Hi, Kim here. I'm a member of the congregation and a member of the Worship and Spiritual Life Committee. I want to start by saying thank you to the committee for stepping up on this particular issue. As somebody that was houseless and in need of low-income housing for a number of years, this is the kind of issue where to take up leadership in this, and particularly in the Bay Area, it's a hard issue to gain any traction on, just because market rate housing is just flat out for anybody in need of affordable housing, and being in community with many of the people for whom this is a very pressing issue. I just want to say thank you for going on a limb to talk about this. I want to. Sorry, my voice is kind of shaking. I want to also reiterate that decisions are not being made at this period in time where I would like to, I'm in favor of getting more information personally, and while recognizing the chicken and egg problem with the developers, and that a certain amount of commitment has to be put forward to, or a certain show of commitment has to be put forward and backed up. I've been trying to get perspective on this and look at this, trying to take a stance in prayer, looking at this, and I'm very much in support of finding some way to make affordable housing, especially since on this campus, especially since we live in a place where it would make a huge difference for so many people in their lives. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joe Hesse, member of the congregation. I've been thinking about this a lot, and I want to speak with so much respect for every person of faith who's wrestling with this issue. And I want to take it up a level, which is and make it personal too, which is I feel so much gratitude about the opportunity to engage with how to say yes to people who are on the margins in society, and that this church is the primary place I can do this. I can't do this almost in any other part of my life. And so this is why I'm a member of a faith community. I do think that faith communities can sometimes be at their worst, and people have great harm done to themselves by being put in the position of having to say no to people on the margins. Not because we say no to people on the margins, but because we don't like the details of what we're talking about or so forth. And I think it's very important that we as a community get really good at practicing saying yes, and which is otherwise known as maybe or how might we. Because as I said, I think it does real harm to people to have to stand up in public and say no to affordable housing. When they're not saying no to affordable housing, they're saying no to I'm not able to walk to the church from 2 blocks away, 3 blocks away. So I think we need to create space and get good at imagining how we might bring social justice and care into the world in community as groups, not just in small little committees. And, no matter what social justice issue we take on as this community, whether it's affordable housing, whatever it is, food safety, food security, the world around us says no day in, day out to all of these people, to everyone. They say no to us. I mean, each one of us has our own experiences with that. And we need to bring, or I feel that I need to bring a massive yes to social justice through my faith community. And I feel like I can hold, personally, all the reasons why something won't work, including all the reasons why Trump is going to vote against something, or some policy is going to change, or there won't be enough parking. I can hold that while we as a community say, how might we? Could we build a 20-story building for Pilgrim Hall instead of using the parking lot over there? I don't know, but I'd like to think about that, you know, and I'd like to, you know, I just think let's, well, I'm going to end it there. I think I made my point, which is I don't like having to say no to things for the wrong reasons. And I think we need to get good at holding the how might we as a community if we're ever going to be able to say yes to anything. Thanks.
I'm Alan Miller, and I'm on the Worship and Spiritual Life Committee also. And I've been coming to all of these meetings and haven't really said anything. And I feel like I'm probably like a lot of people in the church who aren't coming to these meetings. When I first heard about this, I thought, how can anybody say no to affordable housing? And then I come to these meetings and I hear some sides and I think, yeah, that makes sense. I hadn't thought about that before. But then I hear other things. I go, yeah, let's go ahead. Let's say yes. You know, what I want, the only point I really wanted to make is that when I first started coming to this church, a lot of it had to do with this congregation. And I've been going to churches for my entire life. And I know that there can be things like this that come up that can cause a little bit of controversy in the church. Yet I'm still kind of in the honeymoon phase of all this. And it was kind of disheartening to see. What I wanted to say is that part of what I came to this church for were the things, the statements that were being made, the things that the church was doing that made me proud of my church. And I would tell people what was going on in my church. I'd post on Facebook and share things, and I even wrote one time, I am so proud of my church. I feel like regardless of what direction we go with this, and everybody has, their opinion and they're valid. But whichever direction we go, I know that we're all still going to be so proud of this church because taking stands on things, helping where we can, is not going to stop.
Well, I'm going to make this brief. You know, I just want to reflect on where the church has been the last few years. Because I was on the search committee that brought our senior minister here, as was Joe, and he knows that we spent several months at the beginning of the process polling with the congregation, interacting with them in focus groups to determine what the values of the church were and what the priorities of the church were. And there was a question that we were guided by in the forms that the conference provides us. What are the community needs that the church should be most engaged in? And you know, one of the four that was at the very top were homelessness and the related issue of affordable housing. Those two were kind of combined as one concern in the way people put it. And so, you know, I think regardless of how this turns out, we owe a debt of gratitude to the senior minister and to this team that's helped us at least explore that issue. You know, this may not work out, it may not be the plan, but we can't fault them for putting it before us, because that's what we asked for. That we recognize that as a number one or number two priority, and we found a way to it. You know what I have to say, when I first saw that on the survey results, I was sitting with Kara in the sunburst room looking at it, and I said, oh, well, look, what was turned up as number one? That's great, but what are we going to do about it? I mean, I thought, okay, we're just a church. What can we do about affordable housing? And by gosh, I mean, I think this team and Molly have figured out a way that we might be able to do it. It might not be this exact proposal, and it might not work out. I grant you that. We need to see the details. But we can't fault them for bringing them to us. We asked for it. Thank you.
Thanks, Milton. Rachel, can I ask you to pray us out?
But Scott, didn't you go to divinity school? Oh. Let's be in prayer. Holy, holy, holy God, God of peace and God that's in disruption, God that's in creation, God that's in every moment. Help us to feel your presence. Strengthen the ties between us, God. Allow this time to draw us closer to you, closer to each other. Help us to know that you are with us and you will never, never leave us. In the days to come, in the mystery ahead, help us to be guided with patience and love and respect and humor, forgiveness and grace. In the name of Jesus, amen.